in the quiet neighborhood of Maplewood, where life moved at a steady pace, and most families knew each other by name. Daniel and Claire Johnson seemed like the perfect couple. They lived in a modest but beautiful two-story home with a manicured lawn and a white picket fence, the kind of place that looked like it belonged on a postcard. To their neighbors, Daniel and Claire appeared to have everything: stability, comfort, and a marriage that had lasted more than a decade. Daniel worked as an accountant, a man known for his precision and steady nature. He was reliable, rarely missing a day of work, and when people described him, words like responsible and dependable always came up. Claire, on the other hand, was seen as lively and sociable. She was the one who organized neighborhood gatherings, welcomed new families with baked goods, and lit up conversations with her warmth and charm. Together, they gave the impression of balance's seriousness tempered by her energy, her charisma grounded by his calm. But perfection often hides what lies beneath. Two friends, Daniel and Claire's life looked effortless, but behind the walls of their home, things were far from harmonious. Daniel's job required long hours, and he often came home late, drained from the demands of balancing numbers and meeting deadlines. He loved his family in his own way, but his affection came in quiet gestures. Bill paid on time, groceries stocked, the mortgage handled rather than the kind of attention Claire craved. For Claire, the silence at the dinner table and the evening spent alone were suffocating. She wanted passion, excitement, and the feeling of being desired, things Daniel, with his exhausted and predictable routine, rarely offered. The gap between them widened slowly, almost unnoticed at first. Claire began spending more time outside the home, volunteering, attending fitness classes, and surrounding herself with people who admired her, while Daniel believed she simply enjoyed being active and social. In reality, Claire was searching for something she felt she had lost. The admiration of neighbors no longer satisfied her. She wanted someone to look at her the way Daniel once did in their early years. Resentment grew quietly in her heart, feeding on every argument, every ignored gesture. Every night she lay awake in an empty bed. Despite the tension, they kept up appearances. At parties, they smiled for pictures, standing shoulder to shoulder. Claire would lean into Daniel as if they were inseparable, and Daniel would rest a protective hand on her back. Two outsiders. Nothing seemed unusual. Their marriage was painted in the colors of stability and respectability, and no one questioned it. But behind those photographs and polite conversations, their relationship had become a fragile shell, one that was cracking under the weight of unmet expectations. It was within this fragile space that Claire's discontent began to take shape. The longing for something more, the frustration of feeling unseen, and the bitterness toward a husband who seemed married to his work more than to her. All of it created a dangerous storm brewing just beneath the surface. To the world, they were the perfect couple in Maplewood. To each other, they were partners bound by routine rather than love. Their marriage little more than an image waiting to shatter. Claire's restlessness found its outlet in a place that seemed harmless at first, the local gym. She had joined to fill her evenings, to distract herself from the quiet of the Johnson household. That was where she met Ryan, a personal trainer in his late 20s, who was full of energy and attention. Everything she felt Daniel no longer gave her. Their conversations began casually about workouts and nutrition, but quickly shifted into personal stories. Ryan was easy to talk to, and more importantly, he listened. He laughed at her jokes, noticed when she changed her hair, and made her feel visible again. For Claire, who had grown used to being overlooked at home, this was intoxicating. The flirtation grew slowly, feeding on stolen glances and lingering smiles. Before long, it had turned into something more. Claire found herself rearranging her schedule just to see him, staying later at the gym under the excuse of longer workouts. The thrill of secrecy only added to the allure. Soon, what started with coffee after training sessions escalated into late-night meetings at hidden motels outside of town. Claire was living two lives, and the risk of discovery only seemed to fuel her further. With Ryan, she played the role of a woman trapped in an unhappy marriage. She told him that Daniel had grown cold, that he ignored her, and that she was nothing more than a housekeeper in her own home. She described her husband as controlling and unfeeling, painting herself as the victim of a loveless partnership. Whether or not Ryan believed every word, He accepted her story because it fit with the way he wanted to see himself the rescuer. The man who could give her what she claimed was missing. Claire knew exactly how to keep him hooked. The affair wasn't just about passion. It was about power. Every secret meeting made Claire feel alive in a way she hadn't for years. She wasn't just Daniel's wife anymore. She was desired, pursued, and adored. But there was also something darker growing beneath her excitement. The more time she spent with Ryan, the more she resented the life she returned to afterward. Each night back in a quiet house, with Daniel absorbed in paperwork or already asleep, sharpened the contrast between the two men. In her mind, Daniel became the obstacle to her happiness, the barrier that stood in the way of her freedom. The deception began to spill over into her daily life. Claire lied about errands, fabricated social commitments, and used her role as a friendly, active member of the community to cover her tracks. She became skilled at hiding messages, deleting calls, and slipping away without suspicion. Daniel, busy and trusting, noticed little. To him, his wife was simply living her life, just as she always had. But with each passing month, Claire's dissatisfaction deepened. The affair had started as a distraction, a way to fill the emptiness she felt at home. Now, it had become an obsession. The thought of losing Ryan terrified her, and the thought of continuing her life with Daniel filled her with anger. She began to hint to Ryan about a future together, one where they could be free from secrecy, where nothing stood between them. In her eyes, there was only one problem left to solve, and it was the man she had once promised to love forever. On a cold November night, Maplewood was shaken by a tragedy that no one had anticipated. The quiet Johnson home, usually dark by evening, became the center of flashing lights and police sirens. Inside, Daniel Johnson was found dead in the living room. His body lay sprawled across the floor, his face bearing the marks of a violent struggle. The investigators who entered the scene immediately noted how personal the attack seemed. There were no signs of forced entry on the doors or windows, no broken locks, no shattered glass. Nothing had been stolen. His wallet, phone, and valuables were untouched. This was no burglary gone wrong. Whoever had killed Daniel had likely been let inside, and they had attacked with rage rather than desperation. Claire was the one who placed the call to 911. Her voice, trembling and uneven, painted the picture of a distraught wife who had returned home to find her husband lifeless. When police arrived, she appeared shaken, her hands trembling, as she explained she had been out running errands. But her account raised immediate suspicions. She could not clearly recall where she had gone or who had seen her. There were no receipts, no verifiable timeline. Her story was vague, and vagueness, in a case like this, was dangerous. Neighbors began to come forward with information. Several reported hearing raised voices coming from the Johnson home earlier that evening. Though no one could say for certain whose voices they were, the timing lined up too closely to be ignored. Investigators began to piece together the image of a household where arguments might have been far more common than anyone realized. For a couple once thought to be perfect, this revelation came as a shock to those who lived around them. Forensic experts combed through the living room. The attack had been brutal, but oddly precise. There were no defensive wounds suggesting Daniel had fought off an intruder, which made investigators believe he knew his attacker. The blood patterns and the placement of the body suggested that the killer had been close to him, possibly someone he trusted. This, combined with the lack of forced entry, narrowed the field of suspects considerably. At first, suspicion naturally fell on Claire, but proving her involvement was another matter. Her demeanor was that of a grieving widow, and without direct evidence, investigators could not move forward with charges. Still, questions lingered. Why had her alibi been so unclear? Why did her story not match the timeline of events? Neighbors reported. Detectives began to dig deeper into the Johnson marriage, interviewing friends, co-workers, and acquaintances. While many described Daniel as quiet and hardworking, others hinted that Claire seemed dissatisfied in recent years. Her increasing independence, her long hours away from home, and her tendency to keep her phone close at all times painted the picture of a woman who might have been living a double life. The murder of Daniel Johnson was not shaping up to be a random crime, and investigators knew it. Behind the facade of a perfect marriage, something dark had been festering. The evidence was thin, but the circumstances pointed to something far more personal than an anonymous attack. The unanswered question that haunted investigators that night was not just who had killed Daniel, but why his death felt so deeply tied to the secrets his wife might be hiding. Detectives pressed harder into Claire's life, convinced that the truth lay hidden in her relationships outside the home. It was during this phase of the investigation that Ryan's name surfaced for the first time. He wasn't hard to find. His social media accounts showed pictures with Claire at local events. Subtle, but telling glimpses of a bond that was far too close to be explained as casual friendship. A gym member also mentioned seeing them leave together late at night on more than one occasion. The more detectives looked, the clearer it became that Claire had been living a double life, one that contradicted the image of a heartbroken wife. When investigators finally brought Ryan in for questioning, he appeared nervous, but eager to distance himself from the murder. He admitted to the affair almost immediately, claiming he had fallen for Claire but insisting he had nothing to do with Daniel's death. Still, his behavior suggested more than simple fear of scandal. He spoke too quickly, avoided direct eye contact, and shifted uncomfortably when asked about the night of the murder. The detectives noted these signs, pressing him with carefully phrased questions designed to make him slip. It didn't take long before cracks began to show. Ryan revealed that on the night Daniel was killed, Claire had called him several times. She sounded panicked, he said, and urged him to come over, though he refused out of fear of being caught. At first, he stuck to the story that he had no knowledge of the crime. But when confronted with phone records showing multiple late-night calls between him and Claire, his confidence began to crumble. After hours of questioning, Ryan's story shifted dramatically. He confessed that Claire had told him things no one else should have known. She had described Daniel's murder in chilling detail: the placement of the body, the way the living room looked afterward, details that had not been released to the public. According to Ryan, she admitted she had done it herself, strangling Daniel after a heated argument spiraled out of control. She allegedly told Ryan she did it for them to remove the obstacle that stood in the way of their future together. The confession Ryan described was more than detectives could ignore. If true, it meant Claire had not only killed her husband, but had boasted about it to her lover, trusting him to keep her secret. Yet Ryan's account also placed him dangerously close to the crime. Investigators began to wonder, was he telling the full truth? Or was he shaping the narrative to protect himself? Could he have played a larger role? One he was desperate to hide by shifting all the blame to Claire. To strengthen the case, detectives gathered every piece of corroborating evidence they could. Phone records, surveillance footage, and witness statements were all examined with precision. The puzzle pieces were aligning, and Claire's web of lies was unraveling fast. The image of the grieving wife was gone, replaced by the chilling portrait of a woman who may have killed in cold blood and confessed her crime in the most reckless way possible. The case now hinged on proving her involvement beyond doubt. Ryan had given investigators a damning account, but it remained to be seen whether his words would hold under the weight of trial. What had begun as whispers of infidelity had now transformed into a deadly story of betrayal, greed, and murder. The truth was closing in on Claire, and with it came the collapse of the life she had fought so carefully to protect. The trial of Claire Johnson quickly became the most talked-about event in Maplewood's history. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse every day, eager to witness the fall of the woman once seen as the perfect wife and neighbor. Reporters framed the story as one of betrayal, greed, and reckless passion, while prosecutors prepared to paint Claire as a manipulative killer who believed she could outsmart everyone around her. The defense, however, aimed to dismantle Ryan's credibility, portraying him as a scorned lover who twisted the truth to save himself. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The prosecution began by presenting the forensic evidence. Experts testified that the lack of forced entry suggested Daniel knew his killer. Blood spatter analysis pointed to someone who had been close to him, someone who attacked at a moment of intimacy. Then came the damning phone records, showing late-night calls between Claire and Ryan on the night of the murder. The prosecution emphasized that Ryan had nothing to gain from inventing a confession, but Claire had everything to lose. When Ryan took the stand, the room was silent. His testimony was detailed and unsettling. He described how Claire had whispered to him about the killing, how she spoke of removing Daniel as though it were a practical decision rather than a crime. He admitted to fearing her, claiming that after hearing her confession, he realized just how dangerous she was. The jury watched closely as Ryan recounted the chilling words only someone with first-hand knowledge could have known. Claire's defense team fought back aggressively. They highlighted Ryan's nervousness under cross-examination, pointing out inconsistencies in his timeline. They argued that he was trying to protect himself, that he had equal motive to see Daniel gone, and that without physical evidence linking Claire to the act, his testimony was nothing more than hearsay. They painted Claire as a woman trapped in an unhappy marriage, manipulated by a younger man who spun lies to cover his own tracks. But the weight of the evidence began to tip the scales. Neighbors testified to hearing loud arguments between Claire and Daniel in the weeks leading up to his death. A gym member confirmed seeing Claire and Ryan together on the night of the murder, their meeting contradicting Claire's alibi. Piece by piece, the image of a grieving widow crumbled. When Claire herself took the stand, her composure faltered. She denied killing Daniel, but her answers were evasive, and her emotions seemed forced. Every time she insisted she was innocent, the jury saw not sorrow, but calculation. What might have swayed them in another context instead came across as cold and detached. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only a short time. When they returned with a guilty verdict for first-degree murder, the courtroom erupted in gasps. Claire Johnson, once admired by her neighbors, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The betrayal, the lies, and the chilling confession had all caught up to her. As the gavel struck, Maplewood was left with a scar that would never fully heal. The story of the cheating wife who allegedly confessed her husband's murder to her lover became a dark reminder of how quickly a seemingly perfect life could unravel. The case lingered in local memory not just because of the brutality of the crime, but because it revealed a horrifying truth that sometimes the most dangerous threats come from the people closest to us.